I consider myself a climate conscious citizen, so I do a lot to reduce my personal carbon or climate impact. For instance, when I go shopping for groceries, I use reusable bags, avoiding the carbon impact of a single-use plastic bag. I have a reusable water bottle that I take with me everywhere to avoid using single-use bottled water. And I try to reduce my meat consumption wherever possible, but I'm not perfect. I definitely still feel guilty about that steak I ate 2 weeks ago. But as a professional in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, I know that the negative climate impact of my steak from 2 weeks ago pales in comparison to the impact that my chosen industry has on the climate. Buildings account for nearly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is what I've dedicated my professional career to solving. I went to school for architecture and biology, then worked as a sustainability consultant, then an architectural designer, and now I work as a sustainability specialist at HLW Architects. Along with my colleagues, I work every day to ensure that construction projects around the globe avoid millions of steaks worth of climate impact. But as a designer, I also really appreciate buildings. I understand that they provide essential services to us, like shelter. They give us beautiful places to live, work, play, learn, and thrive. And boy, do we really need buildings. I think many of you are probably acutely aware of the housing crisis in this country. And unfortunately, it's not just isolated to the US. Worldwide, the UN estimates that we need to be building approximately 96,000 new homes every single day in order to house our global population. And unfortunately, climate change is also happening. So this really begs the question, how can we continue building more buildings, housing our people, while also combating climate change? Because unfortunately, neither of these crises are going to wait, and they're inextricably intertwined. So there's many, many smart people out there, professionals and governments and regulators, who have made great strides in reducing the carbon and climate impact of our buildings, both through regulation and through fantastic green building standards like LEED, BREEAM, Green Globes, and many, many more, avoiding approximately billions of steaks worth of impact on the environment. And overall, trying to do less harm. But unfortunately, climate change is still accelerating. And simply doing less harm is not helping us fast enough. It's not going to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. So we need to accelerate efforts. Many other professionals and governments have started putting forward this idea of achieving net zero or carbon neutral design, aka how can any new buildings or developments have zero climate or carbon impact on the environment. And to put it simply, how can we be doing zero harm? I love this goal. Ecosystems are all about relationships between living things. I think we can aspire to something greater. Do more good than harm. Or to put it in terms of architecture, how can we be achieving net positive design? Now you may be thinking, wow, this sounds fantastic, net positive design, but how can we even get there? I mean, net zero is an incredibly ambitious goal. And don't get me wrong, it's a goal we certainly need to be striving towards. But what I'm proposing is that we fold it into a more aspirational and hopeful framework. And we can look to ecosystems to understand how to get there. Ecosystems, again, are all about the relationship between living things. And they've evolved over time to avoid negative impacts. So if a single animal or plant has a negative impact, like let's say they produce a toxic substance that kills off their food supply, they're going to cease to exist over time. So they've evolved to have positive relationships with their fellow living organisms and environment. Take the beaver, for instance. Beavers have a definite impact on their environment. They cut down a lot of trees, and then they take those trees, those logs, and they build their homes, and they dam rivers, which has a really fundamental impact on their environment. They're what ecologists call ecosystem engineers. And some people might find them quite destructive. But it turns out that they're actually providing some key ecosystem services here. By damming rivers, they're actually preventing damaging floods from happening. They're also creating new habitats, like for fish and ducks and toads and all these other wetland creatures. They are altering their environment to meet their needs, to build their homes, but they're also having positive outcomes. How can we ever begin to create buildings that are positive contributors? Well, again, I think we should be looking to ecosystems. Ecosystems provide essential life-sustaining services. They provide habitat. They provide clean water and fresh air. And then we should start asking ourselves, how can our buildings and communities and cities start either supporting these life-sustaining functions or perhaps emulating them ourselves? Plants and trees and algae, they take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and they convert it into the stuff of life, into wood and fibers and cells and leaves. And by doing this, they're regulating the climate. They're removing a greenhouse gas and storing it long-term away from the atmosphere. Unfortunately, when we construct buildings nowadays, for the most part, we're using what we call carbon-intensive materials like steel and concrete that take a lot of energy to produce. And so when we're constructing our buildings, we're actually releasing a lot of carbon to the atmosphere. We're disrupting this carbon cycle. But it doesn't have to be that way. Instead, we could be building with sustainably harvested timber, hemp, straw, bamboo, all these plant materials, the stuff of life, that have stored carbon in their fibers. And then we could be constructing buildings with this and storing it in our buildings long term, removing this carbon from the atmosphere. We could be building net positive structures. And, by the way, it creates a beautiful place to live, doesn't it? And this is just one example. This technology, mass timber, it exists today. Buildings across the globe, high-rise buildings, are being constructed with this material. And over time, if scaled appropriately, it could convert our buildings into carbon sinks, just like forests. This is just one example of a net positive design strategy that we could enable if we're thinking a little bigger. So, while I consider my individual carbon impacts, and I hope you all do too, by using less plastic bags, ideally eating less meat, less steak, it does have a big impact. I also propose that we think a little bigger, a little more collectively, a little more hopefully as well. I propose that we don't just look to do less harm or zero harm, but we look to do more good than harm. And in architecture, that means net positive or regenerative design. I suggest that we look to our beautiful natural world to tell us exactly how to get there. Thank you.